Yo, what's good? Big Z here, and today I'm going to give you guys some tips to properly EQ any sound. So I've got this track in front of me to use as an example. And I've got these chords that are sampled from this old recording. So I know I want to EQ it because I hear some harsh frequencies in there. The first thing you have to decide is if you really even need to EQ a sound or not. If you really like how something sounds, you might not have to touch it with an EQ. You might just have to high pass filter it a little bit if there's some low frequencies you don't want in there. But this sound, I'm definitely hearing some different resonant frequencies, and I think I can make it a lot better with an EQ. So let me show you how I go about it so you're not just randomly boosting and cutting things. I like to use the FabFilter EQ just because it's so visual and it has every feature that you really need in an EQ. And I'll show you what I think is the most important feature later in the video, but let's just check out this sound first. So first of all, I need to think, where do I want the sound to sit in the mix? Is it a bass sound? In this case, it's not. So I really don't want any bass frequencies in there because it'll be just fighting with the sub. So that's an obvious one, just cut out the low end if it's competing with your bass. And you can easily hear what you've cut out by clicking the headphones button. Sometimes it can be more helpful to hear what you're cutting out as opposed to what you're leaving. So first I'll find some resonant frequencies and reduce them, and then I'll talk about the difference between subtractive EQ and additive EQ. People debate which one you should do all the time, but I'll show you why it doesn't really matter. But first, let's reduce some of these harsh frequencies. So the best way to do this is just take a band and boost it really high up and sweep through the frequency spectrum. So that's an obvious one. That frequency is pretty annoying, so I definitely want to reduce that. But there's always the question of how much do you really want to reduce it by. You don't want to totally change the sound and just get rid of all those harmonics. That would sound weird if you just completely reduced everything in that section. So what you do is bring it all the way down and then slowly bring it up back to a level that you're comfortable with and you think sounds good. And then check it, just bypass it and unbypass it and check it back and forth to see if the cut you made sounds good. So that's good for reducing those resonant frequencies. Now I want to get into the subtractive and additive EQ. So let me just take these off real quick. So say I want the sound to be less muddy and a little bit brighter. So I can do one of two things. I can either reduce the low frequencies down here, or I can boost the highs. So say I just boosted the highs like 6 decibels above 1,000 hertz. Here's what it sounds like. So that would be additive EQ. I'm boosting those frequencies. But it's actually the exact same thing if I take that band and everything below 1,000 hertz, I reduce by 6 decibels, and then I add back in 6 decibels of gain. So that's the exact same thing as boosting up here and not using that gain. That's why, in my opinion, it doesn't matter if you're boosting or reducing or anything. So the most important thing is actually to match the volume level of your EQ'd sound with how loud it was before you EQ'd it. And I'll show you why. So this sound, I want it to be a little less muddy. Let's get these EQs back in there, those bands. And I'm going to reduce the low end down here, the low mids. And maybe I want a little more air up top. Now when I'm comparing this EQ, turning it on and off, it's hard for me to compare them because I've reduced all these frequencies down here, so the sound is actually a lot quieter with the EQ on than with the EQ off. So maybe you'd think it sounds better with the EQ off, but you don't know that because it just sounds louder with the EQ off. So what you need to do is put some makeup gain in there so they're the same volumes when you're comparing them. So I'm gonna add like 3.5 decibels of makeup gain to make up for these frequencies I reduced. And now I can more properly compare the two. So that allowed me to make a lot more accurate of an assessment of if the EQ is really helping or not. And another thing you should do is listen to the whole mix while the EQ is on and off and see if it's really making a difference. So the goal of this was to make this sound a little bit more present and get rid of those resonant frequencies. So let's see if it helps in the mix. So I think this EQ really helps to reduce that mud and get rid of those annoying frequencies. But you can really use this technique on anything. You can use it on vocals, on drums, on anything you can think of. Let's do this same thing with the vocal really quick so we have another example. So I'm thinking this vocal could sound a little bit more present in the mix, and I think an EQ would help that. So let's open up FabFilter and check out the sounds.
I take the weight off my shoulders as I feel the sky come down on me.
So vocals are very dynamic. Unlike a snare drum that's going to be playing the same frequencies every time it's hitting, a vocal is constantly moving around in frequencies, and those frequencies have a big disparity in volume. That's why on vocals a lot of the time I like to use the dynamic EQ feature in FabFilter.
I take the weight off my shoulders as I feel the sky come down on me. And I can't hold it much longer. Gotta let go so I can be free.
So I think it's sounding a little boxy in this area.
I take the weight off my shoulders as I feel the sky come down.
And the thing about the gain staging part is we can try extreme EQ settings and be able to compare them well. Say I want to reduce this section a lot just to hear how it sounds. I'm not going to be able to accurately assess it when I'm comparing it back and forth.
I take the weight off my shoulders as I feel the sky come down on me.
Because it just sounds so much quieter when the EQ is on. So let's add like 6.5 decibels in there while I'm comparing it.
I take the weight off my shoulders as I feel the sky come down on me.
Now that's an extreme example. I don't think that actually sounds great, but when you're comparing them back and forth and they're the same volume, it's so much easier to make that decision.
I take the weight off my shoulders as I feel the sky come down on me. And I can't hold it much longer. Gotta let go so I can be free. As I feel the sky come down on me. And I can't hold it much longer. Gotta let go so I can be free.
Now that I've EQ'd it, I'm probably going to boost this around 3.5 decibels. And now let's compare it with the whole mix playing.
I take the weight off my shoulders as I feel the sky come down on me. And I can't hold it much longer. Gotta let go so I can be free. I take the weight off my shoulders as I feel the sky come down on me.
So you can hear that EQ is really helping that vocal be a little bit more present in the mix and sound a little less muddy. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that tip was helpful to you. And other than that, I'll catch you next time. Peace.
And I can